Okay, so today we're going to talk a little bit about Photoshop and some of the tools that we can use to make amazing things. So before we begin in Photoshop, there's a couple questions that you need to ask yourself, okay? The first one is your design meant for screen or print, okay? How large should your image be? What resolution should it be? And what filing name structure can I use to easily locate my files? So what that means is when we create a document, we're going to set all of that stuff up in creating a new document in Photoshop. And to do that, we're going to go ahead and jump back to Photoshop. We are going to create a new file. Okay, so we're going to click on the blue button, new file, and you're going to get this dialog box, the new document screen. Okay, everything I've created work before in Photoshop, so I have all of these recent files. Then you have saved templates that you can create. And then Photoshop has, or Adobe has created some templates that you can use and some presets for on the fly, okay? So there's print, and you can click through, and if you notice it's changing over here, art illustration, right? So just like in Canva, if you were in a hurry and you needed to grab something for a presentation, you could click on like this one and it'll load it for you. But you guys are amazing graphic designers and you're going to create your very own, okay? So preset details, naming structure. So we've talked about naming your files properly. I don't want to see 1,000 untitled files in your Google Drive. So what you're going to do is you're going to always name your file properly. You're going to name it your first initial, last name, underscore, and whatever the name of the project is. So this one, we're just going to call it practice. Okay. You always want to name it whatever the file is going to be called. That way, when you look for it, it's easy to find. When I go through my drive and I'm grading your work, it's easy for me to find, and I don't have 1,000 untitled files in my drive. The next is what size it's going to be. This is going to be important. In Photoshop, you have to size your file the exact size you want it to be. If you make it too small, when you open it, or when I open it, or when you save it, it's not going to be visible if it's too small, okay? You always want to make sure that you're set to inches and make sure that it's the proper file size. So unlike Illustrator, where you can scale your projects up or down and it won't lose quality, that is not true in Photoshop. You cannot scale a small file up in Photoshop. It will lose quality and it will distort your image. It'll make it blurry and unusable. Okay, so you always want to make it the size you intend to print it or share it as. So we're just going to set up a 10 by 10 inch document. So make sure this is set to inches. Go ahead and put 10 here and 10 here. Your resolution, so 300, the larger your file size, the more clarity it's going to have when we print it, okay? So if you're printing a document, you always want to have a 300 pixels per inch resolution, okay? So 300. If we were saving it just for the internet for screens, you could get away with 72 pixels per inch. So when you are on a website, and the website takes a really, really long time to load, that is because the images are a larger file size. They were probably just saved as a 300 pixels per inch. They were 10 by 10 inches. They weren't meant for screen. They were most likely meant for print. So if you're making a website and it's image heavy and that's all you're going to do with those images, it's okay to do like a 2 by 2 inch image and at 72 pixels per inch. But for the most part, we're going to do 300 pixels per inch for most of our projects in here, okay? Next is your color space or your color mode. CMYK color is the color space that we use to print on our printers. CMYK stands for cyan, magenta, yellow, and key or black, okay? All of those colors mixed together make the ink, or those are the inks that make the colors that represent whatever we see on our papers, okay? The next option would be RGB color, red, green, and blue. Red, green, and blue are all of the colors that are on your computer screen mixed together to make all of the colors that you see, okay? Okay, those three colors, when they're mixed together, make all of the colors that you see on your screen. So you're gonna have a wider color variety when you use RGB color rather than CMYK color, and we'll get into that a little bit later. Your background content here in Photoshop, you can change it. I always leave mine set to white. Don't ever worry about this. You can also come in here and click a color. I just always leave it set to white because I like to have control over that. We can change that inside Photoshop once we get in there. Okay, so once your document is set up and it looks just like this, you're gonna go ahead and hit create. All right, and now, let me turn off these. Now we have our first document in Photoshop. Some of the things that you want to always have open in Photoshop are your toolbar, your layer panel, and your option panel up at the top, okay? Those are the three most important things that you always want to have open. If you don't see, this is your toolbar, just like in Illustrator. If you click on, yours is probably stacked over here, and it's probably like this, okay? You can click right here and drag it over with your mouse. You're holding the click down and you let go. You can move this around. You can move all of your panels around in Photoshop to give yourself a little bit more space, to move things around, to condense things. It's completely up to you how you work, okay? I like to keep all of my stuff kind of hanging out so I have more working space in case I need to zoom away, and okay. I also like to keep my layer or my toolbar stacked like this. That way it's just nice and convenient. All my tools are right here. Same thing with my layer panel. If you don't see your toolbar, your layer panel, or your option bar, which is this guy right here, you're gonna go to Window and you're gonna check that layer button. So you just click on layers and then your layer box should appear. Same thing with your tools and your options. If you are ever missing anything that you need, okay, it's going to be found in your window panel, such as your brushes or your adjustments or your gradient or your history panel or your shape panel. All of those things can be found right here. You're gonna click on it and it should pop up a new panel. Okay, you can close these out by clicking on this X. You can also close them and change them by clicking on these three lines. And you can do different things within that actual panel, depending on what the panel is, okay? All right, so let's talk about your Photoshop layout. So your control panel is right here. This is similar to the option bar in Illustrator. Depending on what tool you use, this bar is going to change. So as I'm clicking through each tool, you can see that it's giving me different options. Okay, that's why it's important to always have that open. The next thing is your history panel. So your history panel can be found right here under Window, and that's right here. So anytime we do anything in Photoshop, let me draw a couple things, you'll be able to see that it's giving me a new history state. At any time, I can go back to that thing and delete it if I needed to. Okay, so if I make a mistake and I need to go back, I can easily find my mistake in my history panel. I don't have that open personally unless I'm actually looking for something. I just like to keep my workspace nice and condensed. But if I needed it, I would just go to Window and then History, okay? The next thing is your color swatch panel, and that's probably going to be open as well, and that's located right here. These are where your color swatches are. You can also find your color swatches in here, in your toolbar. This is your color picker, and depending on what tool you're using, you can find it up here as well, okay? The next thing is your tool panel, and that's this guy, right? So we have our move tool, our artboard tool, our selection tools, our lasso tool. We're gonna go through each one of these tools as we work through our projects. Okay, but I want you to know that you can hover on any tool at any time and push that play button, and Adobe will launch a little video and tell you what that particular tool does. The next thing is going to be your document window, and that's going to be where your artboard is located. That's this whole area right here, okay? The next thing is going to be your layer panel, and that is right here. Okay, so anytime we create something, we're gonna have layers. And we're gonna go over that in the next video. And the next one is your adjustment panel. So anytime you make any kind of adjustment, it's gonna give you, oops, sorry, that's not actually open right now. Your adjustment panel is right here. So depending on what you're doing, again, I don't like to have this open. I always keep it shut. So that's where that's at. And we'll talk about that later. Oops, let me delete this. Okay, so what I want you to do is I want you to, let me see, check my notes, make sure I'm hitting all of the things you need to do. Left toolbar. Okay. So I just want you to briefly go into Photoshop, and I want you to create a new document just like I did here. If you have already, that's great. You don't need to save it, but it's important that you know how to do this. Okay, so I'm gonna hit don't save, and I'm gonna close it out either right here. Actually, I'm gonna close it out right here. I'm gonna click on Photoshop, and then I'm gonna quit Photoshop, okay? The next thing that you're going to do is you are going to jump back into Google Classroom, and you're going to use this document, okay, and you're going to answer your vocab. This vocab is going to help you study for the final. It's also going to, if you're going to be in my class next year, help you study for the Adobe certification test. All right. If you have any questions, please let me know. So the only thing you're turning in for this assignment is this vocabulary.